Chapter 6. The Sound of Victory. A few days later, Robert sat on a stone bridge in the heart of Bristol, with his peddler's tray at his side. He dangled his feet over the water and nibbled at a small cold pie he had bought at a nearby market stall. A boy about his own age slumped down beside him. Dirty, his hair matted, his face drawn, the boy did not speak but stared out over the water. Something prompted Robert to ask, "Are you hungry?" Without looking directly at him, the boy nodded. On impulse, Robert shoved the whole pie into the boy's hand. It made him feel good to see how the boy wolfed down the food. "What's your name?" Robert asked. "John Woolley. Call me Jack." Robert noticed Jack's dirty clothes had been neatly mended. Surely Jack must have a mother. "Do you live here?" Jack nodded. "Are your parents living?" Jack kicked his feet against the stone arch of the bridge. "Yes," he said sullenly. "Why aren't you home? Or at school?" Robert sensed Jack was not an ordinary street boy like those in London who lived off their wits. Jack shrugged. "I was at school, but..." "But what?" "The teacher put me out." "Why?" Robert was growing more and more curious about Jack. "I should think you'd want to learn everything you could about reading and writing." Jack turned to him. "Then why aren't you in school?" "I have to earn my living. If I had a chance, I'd be in school." Jack scowled and gnawed at his thumbnail. Then Robert caught on. "You've run away," he announced. "How could you tell?" Jack seemed genuinely surprised. "Anyway, I had to." "Why?" "Something's chasing me." Robert could not help look around. "Where?" "It's not anybody you can see." Jack hit his chest with a clenched fist. "It's in here." Robert stared at him, baffled. If he had been one of the people attending John Wesley's preachings, Robert would have thought Jack was seeking God and did not know it. Was Jack feeling a sense of sin, the way people had to before they were converted? "It's the devil after me," Jack blurted. Robert drew back, startled. Jack clenched his fists. "He's after me with all his might. He wants me to hang myself or throw myself in the river." "I know a man who could help you." "No one can help me." Robert tried to think how he could be of help. "What will you do then? You can't stay here. Why don't you go home?" Jack kicked his heels against the stone even harder than before. "I can't go back." "You can't live out on the streets for the rest of your life." "Oh, yes, I can." Jack sprang up and darted away. The last Robert saw of him, Jack had slipped into a narrow alley near the river's edge. Robert stared after him. Why did people run away from help? To run away from home the way Jack did was a sin. Of course, that wasn't the same as grown-ups did, swearing, drinking, beating each other up. "I'm not a sinner. I didn't do any of those things," Robert told himself. "There's another kind of sin," something inside him whispered. But what could it be? Hadn't Mr. Wesley himself said that as a boy he hoped to be saved by not being as bad as other people? He had read his Bible, went to church, and said his prayers. "I do that too," Robert argued with himself. Why wasn't that being converted? Father could not answer the question later on. "Something changes inside of you," he said. "Until that happens, you can do all these other things, and that will not equal conversion." David just shook his head when Robert asked, "What is conversion?" When John Wesley told him about going to America to convert the Indians, Robert listened intently. How could a pagan red man know anything about sin? John Wesley told him about an old Indian he had met. "What do you think you are made for?" he asked the man. He said, "He that is above knows what he is made us for," the Indian said. "We know nothing. We are in the dark. But white men know much, and yet white men build great houses as if they were to live forever. A white man cannot live forever. In a little while, white men will be dust as well as I." John Wesley had replied, "If red men will learn the good book, they may know as much as white men. But neither we nor you can be understood at the book unless we are taught by him who is above. And he will not teach you unless you avoid what you already know is not good." I believe that, the Indian said. He will not teach us while our hearts are not right. And our men do what they know is not good. They kill their own children. After telling this story, John Wesley added, I have seen some so-called Christians who were worse than the wildest Indians I have ever met in America. To think that even the Indians in America knew there was something in people that told them whether or not they were doing something wrong. Robert puzzled over Wesley's statement. I had fair weather religion. I could talk well and believe myself while no danger was near. But in a storm, when death looked me in the face, I asked myself, what if the gospel isn't true? Why couldn't people just accept the Bible and its truth? Why do some people object so loudly? When John Wesley preached from the window of an upper room in the house of a gray-headed old silversmith named Dibble, people crowded into the yard and overflowed into the streets. One man kept saying, avoid the false teacher. In another meeting, people came just to criticize. Sometimes such persons felt God's Spirit whether they wanted to or not. A doctor and a Quaker were two people convinced against their own will that God was working through John Wesley. One day on the street with his peddler tray, Robert heard a man named John Hayden tell another, these Methodists fall into strange fits. Come and see for yourself. Oh, this has happened before, another man said. Why, in 1630 at Stewarton, Scotland, converts were so affected that many people called it the Stewarton sickness. See for yourself, John Hayden urged. I constantly attend public prayers and sacraments, but I am against dissenters of every denomination. All these meetings with John Wesley preaching, I call a delusion of the devil. On the street the next day, Robert heard that John Hayden was raving mad. He had sat down to dinner, a man said, but wanted to finish a sermon he had been reading. At the last page, he suddenly changed color, fell off his chair, screaming and beating himself against the ground. Several people wanted to see what had happened to John Hayden. Robert followed them to Hayden's house. The place was full of people already. Please go away, Mrs. Hayden pleaded. No, let them all come, Mr. Hayden was shouting. Let all the world see the just judgment of God. 2 or 3 men were holding him as quiet as they could. Word had been sent to John Wesley. When he came, Mr. Hayden burst out, Yes, this is the man I said deceived the people, but God has overtaken me. I said his teaching is a delusion of the devil, but I was wrong. John Wesley and others prayed with him. Mr. Hayden found a new peace in his faith. God has put a new song in his mouth, people said. Later, Wesley preached on the text, Except you are converted and become as a little child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. More and more people were overcome by preaching. Others argued, Mr. Wesley, don't take people's cries or tears to mean people have given up their sins. I have heard these things with my own ears and have seen with my own eyes, John Wesley replied. I have seen persons change in a moment from the spirit of fear, horror, and despair to the spirit of love, joy, and peace, to a pure desire of doing the will of God. Tears and crying are not the fruit of the Spirit. The results are found in how they live afterward. God does forgive sins. If he allows people to become excited and faint, then who am I to question his wisdom? Such things are purely natural effects, someone sniffed. Those people fainted away because of the heat and closeness of the room, others said. Still others maintained it was a cheat. They could help it if they wanted to. Wesley kept on preaching. God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. To make room for the societies of Nicholas and Baldwin Street, he bought a piece of ground in the Horse Fair near St. James Churchyard. The first stone was laid on May 12, 1739, a date Robert determined to remember. There was more talk. This time David brought the news. George Whitefield wrote from London that he would have nothing to do with Wesley's new meeting house. That was true, Robert found out, but for good reason. George Whitefield insisted that John Wesley be responsible for the debt of the building that was more than £150. I hope this new room of Wesley's means he'll preach inside, someone grumbled. This field preaching is indecent. Wesley admitted field preaching seemed strange to him at first. I used to think saving souls was almost a sin if it wasn't done in church. Now I wonder at those who still talk so loud of the indecency of field preaching. The highest indecency is St. Paul's Church, when a considerable part of the congregation are asleep or talking or looking about, not even minding what the preacher says. On the other hand, there is the highest decency in a churchyard or field, where the whole congregation behaves and looks as if they see the Judge of all and hear him speaking from heaven. By this time, John Wesley had a full schedule of preaching appointments in and near Bristol. Mr. Wesley is going to preach in Bath next Tuesday, David informed Father one day. Father needed no encouragement. We'll take the wagon and be there. The city of Bath was shaped like an enormous saucer. Well-dressed people crowded its narrow, winding streets. What do people do here? Robert asked Father. A traveler whose vast neckerchief was tied in a bow and whose dark trousers were stuffed into top boots overheard Robert's question. Why, they take the baths, of course, he answered. They've been here since Roman times, these baths. Then there's cards, gambling, or going to a pub like Horrid Tom's. Of course, if you're an invalid, you go to the King's Bath near the southwest side of the Abbey Church. It's open air, you know. The traveler volunteered to act as a guide. Robert gazed at the green water of the baths and was amazed at seeing ladies with elegant headdresses moving slowly through the water, pushing floating pans with dainty handkerchiefs, snuff boxes, and flowers. Notice that the men at Bath don't wear swords anymore, the volunteer guide remarked. Beau Nash forbade it. Who was Beau Nash? The master of ceremonies. He's really the king here. As far back as 1706, he had a night watch installed, arrested vagrants, and had the street swept. He tells people what to do, and they do it. Yes, sir. Beau Nash is a man I'd never want to cross. He has made his own rules, and they are good rules, too. If he doesn't think a person is good for business, he runs him out of town. Or should I say, he drums him out. The volunteer's guide word became clearer the next morning when people assembled outdoors to hear John Wesley preach. The great man has heard of John Wesley, a bystander said, and he does not like him. Everyone knows that means John Wesley will be drummed out of town. A richly dressed lady sniffed to her companions. I don't know why you insisted I come. It's repulsive, impertinent, disrespectful. In what way? Why, the idea of trying to level all ranks, do away with class distinctions. It's monstrous to be told you have a heart as sinful as the common wretches that crawl the earth. And I understand that is what John Wesley keeps saying. Are you going to listen to such ideas? I think you'll have benefit, her companion said. Maybe you'll even be saved. Like my cleaning woman? The rich lady snorted. Do you think a woman like that, who says, no, love, who are you, who's your mother, is saved? According to preacher John Wesley, yes. God's salvation is for everyone. John Wesley told his hearers, the scripture has included all people under sin, high and low, rich and poor alike. Everyone listened intently. In the distance, kettle drums and French horns sounded. It's Beau Nash and his band, people whispered. He's coming to drum John Wesley out of Bath. The drum beats grew louder. Was it the sound of victory for Beau Nash, the ruler of Bath? Or was the victory going to be in God's hands?